Apparently now, the Never-Trumpers are upset that Trump isn't manly enough. I have no idea what this argument is supposed to be, and I have no idea why The Atlantic is publishing it, because it's not a good argument and the whole thing just makes no sense. Of course, when it comes to Never-Trumpers or the resistance, it's all about Orange Man being bad, and they will take whatever they can to claim the Orange Man is bad, and they will write about it. Which brings us to this article from The Atlantic. Quote, "Why do working class white men, the most reliable component of Donald Trump's base, support someone who is, by their own standards, the least masculine man ever to hold the modern presidency?" writes Radio Free Tom. If you're not familiar with Tom Nichols, he's a Never-Trumper. First of all, you want to give working... Okay, let's operate into the assumption that working class white men only really care about masculinity, not like, I don't know, say the economy or something. Fine. Well, he was up against Hillary Clinton. So if you're telling me that working class white men had to choose between Hillary Clinton, literally a woman, and Trump, who's not masculine enough, well, Trump is still more masculine than Hillary, right? I mean, I would assume. So they're right off the bat. If you're talking about someone wanting to vote for masculinity, they only had one real choice, right? I mean, they're not going to vote for Bernie Sanders. Well, actually, a lot of them wanted to. But if you're giving them this choice, yes, don't be surprised. But let's just stop right there. The idea, at least from my experience, that Trump supporters are super concerned with macho masculinity is just like, it's made up, okay? And I think it's stupid that I'm even talking about it, but it is made up. However, there's actually a really great discussion that ensues in the Twitter thread, which includes several, I believe, evolutionary psychologists, including one of the experts on the issue, Mr. Jack Murphy. If you're not familiar with Jack Murphy, I had him on the Timcast IRL podcast several months ago before, the world was ending. And he wrote a book called Democrat to Deplorable, breaking down why it is that he, a working class white man, wanted to vote for Trump. But more importantly, he interviewed, I think, like 1,500 people, did a survey and found, asked real reasons as to why they wanted to vote for Donald Trump. It's actually a really interesting thread because you have academics like Jeffrey Miller and Nicholas A. Christakis, who are both pretty much like anti-SJW, but actually asking these questions. And I'm pretty sure Nicholas A. Christakis, he's a professor who was attacked by social justice warriors over like a costume thing that happened at some university. He's actually anti-Trump. So let's do this. Let's read this, and I think it's actually fairly interesting. I saw this story from The Atlantic this morning, and I'm like, this is dumb. I'm never going to read this. But when I saw that, well, actually smart people were having a real conversation, from professors to working class white individuals who support Trump, I thought it actually got down to some of these core issues, and Jack knows best. But in order to give you the proper context, let's see what Tom Nichols actually says. Sitting atop his ivory tower, he writes, "Donald Trump, the most unmanly president. Why don't the president's supporters hold him to their own standard of masculinity?" I'm going to stop right there. We're going to read this, but I want to point out, Trump is boorish. He's a large man. He pushes people around. He eats whatever he wants. He sleeps with supermodels. He flies in a private jet. I don't know what the point you're trying to make is. Do you want him to be like a Muscle Beach bodybuilder? Donald Trump is masculine in other ways. I certainly think Trump has some issues and character defects. In fact, I'd say he has a lot of them. But it's a weird thing to even write. I mean, who's voting for the president based on the way they look? They're voting, at least many of these people, for policy issues. Let's read. "So many mysteries surround Donald Trump. The contents of his tax returns, honestly, I don't care. The apparent miracle of his graduation from college, also don't care. Some of them are merely curiosities. Others are of national importance, such as whether he understood the nuclear weapons briefing given to every president. I prefer not to dwell on this question. Yeah, sure, but I mean, come on, man. Obama killed kids, dude. Like, I can't stand this argument. But since his first day as a presidential candidate, I've been baffled by one mystery in particular. Why do working class white men, the most reliable component of Donald Trump's base, support someone who is, by their own standards, the least masculine man ever to hold the modern presidency? The question is not whether Trump fails to meet some archaic or idealized version of masculinity. The president's inability to measure up to Marcus Aurelius or Omar Bradley is not the issue. Rather, the question is why so many of Trump's working class white male voters refuse to hold Trump to their own standards of masculinity, Why they support a man who behaves more like a little boy. Could it be that Trump said, I'm going to fix the economy, it's going to be great, and then it was? It's that simple. I mean, there's a lot of issues, and I will defer to Jack Murphy because he knows, he's literally a Trump supporter, wrote a book about it and interviewed these people. But come on, man. Hillary Clinton was talking about war. She was talking about international trade, things that people didn't like. Donald Trump was up on stage pushing her around. Yeah, so people voted for it. Listen, you remove all of the policies, and what do you get? People who voted for a guy who was telling Hillary, wrong. Did you ever see that? I got to be honest, it's hilarious. It's like decorum is out the window. But when Hillary Clinton would try interjecting when Trump was talking during the debates, Trump would go, he'd be talking, Hillary would jump in. Excuse me, no, excuse me, I'm talking. You see, your husband, then Hillary's talking, and he goes, wrong, you're wrong. He interrupts her, and he doesn't let her interrupt him. You want to talk about what your idealistic masculinity is? I don't care. What people saw there was a guy who refused to be pushed around, who in fact pushed other people around. You got to look. You don't take that into consideration, and that's, I guess, why they're so confused by this. He writes, I am a son of the working class, and I know these cultural standards. The men I grew up with think of themselves as pretty tough guys, and most of them are. They are not the products of elite universities and cosmopolitan living. These are men whose fathers and grandfathers came from a culture that looks down upon lying, cheating, and bragging, especially about sex or courage. They admire the value, the understated swagger, the rock-solid confidence, blah, 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 blah. He's never once, he has not yet actually explained to anyone why he's making the assumption with this article as to why someone would vote for masculinity. That's the issue I take right now, okay? This is an article that is trying to make up a fake premise and use that to justify why you shouldn't vote for Trump. This is the kind of trash garbage content from once prestigious magazines you can expect to get in the Orange Man bad era. And it's sad to see such a, famed prestigious publication go down this route. Which brings me to the conversation and the real reasons people would vote for Donald Trump. We actually have one thread. It kind of diverges, it breaks off when Radio Free Tom himself steps up and can't actually, stand the argument. Jeffrey Miller. Let's see if he has in his bio who he is. He is a psychology professor. Wrote The Mating Mind, Mate and Virtue Signaling, Agnostic Centrist into Evolution. Okay. This is academics, all right? He says, that face when the stench of bitter, desperate partisanship drives everyone away from a once great magazine. The Atlantic doubling down on your death spiral. Sad. Nicholas A. Christakis. And let's see if he has, he's a Sterling professor of social and natural science at Yale, physician, author of Blueprint, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society. He responds, seriously, Jeffrey, how do you address the argument itself? It does strike me as curious, too. Jeffrey says, read From Democrat to Deplorable by Jack Murphy live, if you actually want to understand why working class guys support Trump. Nicholas says, yes, I understand why many of them do support Trump. The question is why they do it despite those other clear reasons not to. And not only in terms of their economic interests and now public health interests, but given Trump's lack of manliness, leaving aside lack of morals. I'm going to jump in before I show you Jack Murphy, who has the real political points, and just say, first of all, does masculine even scale on the top 10 reasons to vote for someone? Is manliness or masculinity even up there? I honestly don't think it does. I don't think it ranks. It honestly makes no difference. I mean, to me, you need an actual argument policy-wise. So I think it's fascinating that Nicholas Christakis thinks it's an interesting argument. Why is it curious? I think it should be obvious. But I guess if you are, an ivory tower or progressive, you grew up without, hardship. I don't want to make assumptions about these individuals. Perhaps you're less likely to understand what people are hoping for and what they're looking for. Well, let's go to Jack Murphy. Jack wrote a book called Democrat to Deplorable. Many of you are probably familiar with it, where he interviewed a lot of people. First, he says Title IX reform, changed posture towards China. See Ham and Cheese, quote, China shock doctrine. No more wars of regime change. To reverse condemnation of masculinity, see APA. To defeat wokeism, see Conceptual James. Among a few others. Full stop. Let's actually take a look at some of this. First of all, 100%. In fact, I can't remember. Tucker Carlson talked about this, that I think it was Susan Rice. I don't want to get too much in the weeds. Michael Flynn was being investigated partly because he said China was the real adversary, not Russia. And that shocked them. Oh, no, but Russia is our real adversary. No, it isn't. China is. That was correct. So Hillary Clinton comes up and she goes, Russia, the Russians, the Russians. And Donald Trump goes, China, China, China. And people heard this and they said, Trump's right about China, man. My factory went to China. I didn't go to Russia. That product I used to make at my factory is now coming from China, not Russia. The TPP, which Hillary Clinton supported, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, would give Pacific Rim countries tremendous power over our markets, and it would exacerbate the trade problems and the loss of our jobs. That was your choice. Someone calling out China for a decade. Or I'm sorry, for 6 years at the time, probably longer. Actually, I think way longer. Or Hillary Clinton, who supported this right away. Trump had been calling them out, and that was important. Didn't matter if Trump had 3 wives and multiple kids with those wives. If he was a blackguard, offensive guy, he was the only guy offering you a solution. So maybe people voted for him begrudgingly. Let's go to the next one. No more wars of regime change. Spot on. Hillary Clinton, around the time of the election, said something to the effect of she wanted a no-fly zone over Syria. And she was warned that would be a declaration of war with Russia. And her basic response was, so what? Trump kept saying, if you vote for her, you will get war with Russia. People didn't want that. And that's a big reason why many conservatives and even Trump supporters actually like Tulsi Gabbard, because that is such an important issue for everybody. It's an important issue for me. This absurdity of the United States being like, we're going to meddle in a foreign country because we don't like what they're doing, like Joe Biden did in Ukraine, and then nobody cared. Oh, but if someone interferes with us, then they get angry, right? A lot of people on the progressive left, it's one of the reasons why they actually defend Trump when it comes to issues of the national security investigations into him, notably Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald doesn't like Trump. Like, you can look at his Twitter thread. But Glenn Greenwald has no problem calling out the security apparatus targeting Trump as administration. And I think it partly has to do with Glenn Greenwald. Well, he's probably biased because they targeted him too, but he's always been, rather opposed to the overstep of the surveillance state. And he's no Trump supporter. To reverse condemnation of masculinity, and that's an important one. Donald Trump is boorish, braggart. He's a bully, like I mentioned with the Hillary Clinton debate thing. You're getting in the media, you're getting across the board a condemnation of masculinity. It's been going on for a really long time. They call it toxic masculinity. They say, I think the APA said that stoicism is toxic. This idea that a man will be calm and in control of his emotions is toxic. The explanation that was given to me was that if a man, his wife, and his kids are in a car and they get into an accident, the wife and the kids might be upset, might be panicking, and the man is too. But to maximize survival chances, the man constrains himself, assures everyone everything's okay, not to worry, and he's going to change the tire. Or if he got like a flat tire or something, everyone's freaking out. Oh no, what's happening? And he says it's going to be okay. Imagine if we got rid of this notion and men were told just to cry and bawl their eyes out. So what? The man and the wife are both scared, huddling together while their kids cry, and they say everything's as worse as it's ever been. Nothing's going to get better. Both parents should have a degree of stoicism. The mother should be comforting the kids. The father should be comforting the kids. And then either parent, in my opinion, should be in control of their emotions and can go out and fix that tire. Masculinity doesn't mean you're a man. It goes both ways. And I think it's important for parents, for leaders to be in control. Now, Donald Trump doesn't have that, in my opinion. He goes on Twitter and he goes nuts. He says things. He gets triggered. He gets dragged. It's one of his weaknesses. But it's what he represents, in my opinion, at least. What he represents is that he pushes back on that to an extreme degree. So yeah, there is a bit of a double-edged sword there. And to defeat wokeism, which is in part connected to the masculinity. Jack goes on to say, and at the end of the day, it was to defeat the Democrats who have members that believe in a system of justice anathema to American values. The Democrats have among them people who wish to see the end of the Enlightenment, and we don't trust these to police themselves. Mr. Christakis, with all due respect, we voted for Trump to protect people like you. Could there be a more stark dividing line? Democrats, Clinton, Biden want more, bigger, worse Title IX. Trump wanted reform. Title IX operationalized woke. Betsy DeVos is dismantling it for you. And in comes Tom Nichols. Aren't you glad you asked, Christakis? Working class guys violate their own sense of what it means to be a man because they're upset about Title IX at schools they didn't go to. It was right there in front of us all the time. I got to stop right there. Schools they didn't go to. It's about society. It's about culture. Yeah, they didn't go to those schools. They still don't like seeing the mainstream, both in media and culture, be dominated by these institutions and their dogmatic law. I totally agree with that and respect that. I don't want to see that either. Christakis says, Jack, I don't think that balance of pros and cons adds up, given the cons. But obviously, I'm not a fan of Trump. So that just be why I'm not seeing it. And often people act against themselves anyway. This is where perspective comes in, a very important point that needs to be made. One of the things I try to highlight is that the reason I have the opinions I do is probably because of the news that I read. But I try to read balanced news. I try to make sure the people I follow, I got a bunch of mainstream media lefties and progressives and activists. I follow them too. I want to know what they think. And I want to know what conservatives think too. I then take conservative outlets, liberal outlets, look at them, and then try and determine what is most likely to be true. And I think I have a general understanding, and it would seem that right now, typically, you will see slightly more correct answers coming from right-wing commentary than left-wing commentary. You're likely to see mainstream media leaning to the left with a tendency to be correct on certain issues, but then maybe analyze them or use these in ways to benefit the left. That's where it ultimately falls down to, at least to where I see it. So then when it comes to someone like Nick Christakis, he's perhaps not reading the breakdown, which would call out the lies. For instance, if you read mainstream media, they will tell you over and over again that Obamagate is not real, that it's fake news. This is absolutely incorrect. Obamagate is a real phenomenon. Is there any definitive proof about Obama or people in his administration? No, but there is evidence to suggest, at the very least, we need an investigation into this. The whole thing seems fishy. And where we're at right now with Obamagate is you have this puzzle laid out in front of you, and the pieces need to be put together. In order for that to happen, you need someone to put those pieces together, but it exists. Now, they try to claim based on the media sources they read, something is true or something isn't. I think that I read a balanced set of news, and because of that, I have a tendency to be right. For people who only read right-wing sources, their perspective will be skewed very heavily against the left. For people who read only left-wing sources, their views will be skewed very heavily against the right. But there is a study that shows moderates tend to read slightly more liberal news than conservative news. Conservatives read, so it's like moderates will read 60% liberal, 30% conservative, 66 to 33. And then conservatives will read 33% liberal to 66% conservative. Liberals are at 95+% liberal outlets. If you're reading biased news and you can't see what's happening around you, yes, you will be uninformed and you won't understand. It's the easiest way to put it. James Lindsay of the famous Sokol Squared hoax, if you're familiar, says, I generally think Jack is right about why, or mostly right, without realizing there's a right-wing deconstruction project happening in it too. I agree with you, Nicholas. The pros don't outweigh the cons because I see deconstruction projects everywhere I look now. The overlooked part here is that there is a pseudo-populist insurgency going on from the right that took much of its inspiration from Murray Rothbard, which got to Trump via his institutions and Bannon. There's also a critical theory movement, critical government studies. Jack Murphy says, pick your deconstruction battle, I guess. Left-wing deconstruction involves deconstruction of reality, science, and reason. Right-wing deconstruction is more of a policy and strategy change, correct? James Lindsay says, I wouldn't call the right-wing deconstruction project friendly to reality, science, or reason either. No, they just have different targets as to who is allowed to use those things and for what. In both cases, the right is administrative state power and state power more generally. Jack says, I must be running in different circles. I'm sorry, James brings up conspiracy theories. Jack challenges it and says, we took all of this seriously. And I got to point out, man, it's true. I think it would be absurd to deny. There are absolutely more individuals on the right pushing conspiracy theories. This is a problem, but the problem isn't due to the conservatives' view or the conservatives' opinion. The problem is due to the media's failures. When the media has pushed biased news and lies for so long, and social media arose and allowed us to challenge those and prove them wrong, like I mentioned, I think there's a tendency among right-wing commentary to be more likely to be correct, not always. You'll end up with people constantly saying the left isn't doing, their research, the left isn't being honest. That tends to be true. And because of this, you will end up with complete distrust for mainstream media. And I've explained this before, actually, several times in the past few years. I think I may have even brought it up on the Rogan podcast. The left blindly follows mainstream media, so they get an incomplete picture. Because the mainstream media is broken and lying and propping up the left and the Democrats, conservatives turn away and look for alternatives. They start doing their own research. You can end up with a center-right faction of individuals who are more likely to be correct because they've done their own research. And because social media has been banning conservatives, you end up with this group dominant. And that's why I believe the right has a tendency to be correct. However, you do end up with a large faction of people who do their own research too much and end up in conspiracy theory internet rabbit holes about 5G satellites from space and flat Earth and other nonsense. If you distrust the media because you've seen their lies, you can go off a cliff. And that's why it's very important for conservatives to call this stuff out too. So ultimately, I don't know. It's a Memorial Day. I hope you guys are all enjoying yourself. To be honest, not a whole lot going on other than the same old, same old. But I thought it was interesting that we had some psychologists, professors, and actual Trump supporters talking about this idea. And ultimately, I want to wrap it up with in a nice little bow and put it this way. This story explains everything you need to know about the entire argument. To put it simply, masculinity just doesn't come up as an issue. It makes no sense. And more importantly, if you paid attention to what's going on in the media and in our culture, you'd realize masculinity is under fire. They call it toxic. So why would someone not understand this? It shows you that someone like Radio Free Tom, a never Trumper, doesn't actually understand working class white people, doesn't understand cultural issues, underlying this, and probably reads too much mainstream media, which is biased against Trump supporters and the working class. Yes, the entirety of the working class, they're biased against them. People are getting banned on social media. Take a look. There's an article that Barry Weiss wrote for the New York Times about Joe Rogan and why he's so popular, how he's the new mainstream. And she makes a really important point. It was obvious to everyone that the allegations against Joe Biden were treated very differently than the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. Anyone with two brain cells to rub together could see that. Now, what happens? The people who can't fall into this camp. They hate Trump. The media told them so. A regular person sees this story and says, you're lying to me. And that's where I find myself, right? We can see how obvious the lies are. And this is what I was saying about the tendency. The right is not always correct. They're, in fact, often wrong. But the left has a tendency to be wrong. Mainstream media outlets have a tendency to be correct, but skew their politics to the left, which creates these problems. If you don't understand what's going on because you're only reading biased media, well, there you go. But a regular person who sees this, that's what starts the trend. They see the lies. They say, why is it that you did treat Joe Biden and Brett Kavanaugh differently? That's where I am. I don't think, I think Brett Kavanaugh's had some bad ideas on surveillance on the Fourth Amendment. I've talked about it before. I don't want to rehash all this stuff, but there's reasons to find that he's got, bad ideas. And I think that's a reason to challenge him for the Supreme Court. However, Donald Trump is the president. He was elected. He can choose who he wants to nominate. And then the Senate confirms that. And so look at me, if milquetoast fence sitter, right? But I can point out that I don't agree with the conservative opinions on these things, but I do agree that when it comes to issues of reality and culture, they have a tendency to be correct on the facts. And that creates a very serious problem. A media that is completely out of touch with all of the people they need in order to win in November. The people who switched from Democrat to Republican, Democrat to deplorable, they still don't get it, and they won't. And so long as that's the case, and it basically says they have no idea what happened in 2016, well, there you go. That'll be it, and Trump will win. Or they'll cheat. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at timcast.net at 4 p.m. It's a different channel. Go there, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you then.